Salutations everybody, it is Matty here today, sitting down to talk about a pretty sensitive subject as we're diving into the massive amount of layoffs that are occurring at Microsoft as we speak. They recently announced in the last 24 hours that around 10,000 people are going to be laid off, including the gaming division as well. So Xbox, Bethesda are affected by this, and we're going to dive into who is affected by this and what it means for the future of their games. Now, if you've been paying attention to the ways of the world as of lately, everyone's trimming down, unfortunately. We just saw, for example, Amazon announced that they will be laying off 16,000 people and even announced that they had overhired to a degree. So unfortunately, a lot of people are being impacted at a time they need a job most, with inflation happening. So my thoughts go out to those of you who are affected by this. I actually knew a couple of people who were laid off. So again, my thoughts to those who have been affected by this, and I do hope you land on your feet. Today we're diving into Xbox 343 especially, and even Bethesda a little bit, as they were not immune to these layoffs, as I said earlier. So let's dive in. Ladies and gentlemen, if you're new here, you're interested in Xbox news and information, Bethesda news and information, you're in the right place. Consider subscribing. All right. So we're going to kind of bounce around a couple of articles here. We're going to talk with Bloomberg a little bit. We're going to talk with Lords of Gaming a bit, and then I'll deliver my thoughts afterwards. So let's begin the conversation with Bloomberg, where Jason Schreier had the scoop. He writes, the Xbox maker said on Wednesday it's cutting 10,000 jobs as it seeks to reduce costs amid a broader economic slowdown. Some people at Bethesda Game Studios, maker of the upcoming Starfield, as well as 343 Industries, the company behind 2021's Halo Infinite, were affected, according to people familiar with the matter. Some of those who lost their job were veterans who had been with Xbox for more than a decade, said the people who asked to not be named because they weren't authorized to speak publicly. Now, bouncing over to Lords of Gaming, where they had a scoop of their own, according to their source, at least 60 people at 343 Industry have been laid off this morning from the Redmond, Washington-based developer. This is a significant portion of the workforce, which at its peak employed over 450 people. The layoffs are said to be across the company. However, they are heaviest towards individuals working on the single-player side of the studio. Now, bouncing back to Jason, he writes, in an email to staff, 343 Industries studio head Pierre Hintz said the company had, quote, made the difficult decision to restructure elements of our team, which means some roles are being eliminated, end quote. He wrote that the studio would continue supporting Halo Infinite's multiplayer and live service elements. Note that there's no mention of the single player. Joe Staten, the creative director and Halo veteran who joined 343 in 2020 to help steer Halo Infinite to the finish line, will depart that outfit and rejoin Xbox's broader publishing division, Hintz said. Okay. There are a lot of places that we can begin with this. 343 will definitely be the main subject here, but since it'll be a little more brief, allow me to talk about Bethesda. There was a shock factor to all of this, of course. When you see that many people losing their jobs, you're like, holy smokes, man. But especially when you see gaming impacted, I don't think we've seen massive studio layoffs like this in quite some time. It really hasn't occurred, to my knowledge, since the early 2010s, where typically after projects, tons of people were laid off, so then the team could keep the main veteran leads and then scale up again over time as they began work on a new project. But this is something that the industry is no stranger to. It just feels like it hasn't happened in a while in such a massive way. So a lot of people were impacted by this. I think the expectation for all of us was that Microsoft would help them scale up, if anything, not trim them down, especially because optically speaking, they bring Bethesda in and then people lose their jobs. You'd have to imagine that some people at Bethesda are kind of like, would I have lost my job anyway if we were never acquired? But I would offer the counterpoint, would the company still be standing if Bethesda just owned them themselves? Like, I just couldn't really see it happening on their current trajectory, and they probably would have had to rush out a bunch more buggy games, like probably even Starfield. With that in mind, the surprise factor for Bethesda really lies in that this is Bethesda Game Studios. Obviously, there's a lot of question marks surrounding Starfield. Specifically, when is this game coming out? And there's so many rumors, I'm a part of that rumor mill, on whether or not it'll get delayed, where it'll end up landing. And so with all of that confusion, then you see layoffs. It's like, why in the heat of development are people losing their jobs? Now, we don't know specifically what person lost their job and what position in the company, but when you hear that veterans across Xbox are losing their jobs, I do have a couple of theories, and I think it is wise to speculate a little bit on what could be happening here. Now, with all of this in mind, the reason Bethesda Game Studios is also a surprise factor is typically when you hear Bethesda employees speak about their time at BGS, it's usually about how long the tenures there are. Most people are there for over a decade. That's practically unheard of in the games industry, more so because of the fact that people want to just move jobs, move positions, seek out new opportunities, get paid more. But the way Bethesda Game Studios is structured, they just have that it factor that keeps people there for a long while. And seeing people affected there by layoffs is just insane to think about. It really does speak to the nature of our situation. So that's what I really have to say on Bethesda. What I really want to get into is 343. Now, 343 is an interesting one because I think for a lot of us, we got to be real with ourselves. The writing was sort of on the wall here. Just last September, we saw how Bonnie Ross, who was originally the studio head, alongside David Berger, were both kicked out. While it was never directly said by Bonnie, reports have said otherwise, and quite honestly, this is one of those connecting the dots moments where she kind of had the option of saying, I'm choosing to leave rather than I was fired. David Berger being the director of engineering and Bonnie Ross being the studio head. A lot of people were calling for her position because they were saying, she's incompetent and we need some new leadership in there. Now, the interpretation was with the new leadership stepping in that this would sort of be what we called on Defining Duke, the Staten era. Like Joe Staten is going to come in, he's going to do his thing and guide Halo Infinite to the promised land. When you see that he is deliberately chosen to leave, I think it adds even more credibility to the Lords of Gaming report, which said that the single player component was hit. You see, I got to imagine that the game has truly changed for Halo Infinite, right? You have to think about this 10-year plan that they were promising. We were hearing about the Endless being some type of campaign expansion because no spoilers here, but Halo Infinite does end on a bit of a cliffhanger. Oh, and beyond that, there was also the reported Battle Royale mode. Is that still on? We're hearing a lot of different things here, but when you see significant cuts being made, and more importantly, that key factor of hope lying in Joe Staten to kind of guide Halo to what it once was, put it all together, you gotta wonder if they're deciding to scale this down and just get Halo Infinite to make a little bit of money before they move on to something else. I think this is leading to what I've been saying for a while, which is I do believe, as it was written in the email here, some restructuring is going to happen at 343. They're going to be significantly downsized, and I think they're going to work on something new. Now, that's just speculation, but given how much of a failure Halo Infinite was, yeah, we all kind of had a feeling someone has to pay the price. But eventually, I think Xbox saw we're investing too much in this team, and that's the sad reality of it. Not that the team didn't invest a lot in Halo. Halo Infinite is a fun video game. That's the frustrating part about all of this. It just needed that support. It just needed more diversity in its campaign. And it's so sad to see how it all ended up. And you got to wonder how liable Xbox is for this fate, because I had always called for a delay. Push it back. If that's what got your roadmap together, I think Halo Infinite would have thrived in March of 2022, especially now knowing how 2022 went for Xbox. They could have used an exclusive, so they should have spread the wealth instead of making a little checklist. But this also goes down to 343's hiring process and how flawed it is. And I know this extends into Microsoft, but what happened at 343 is they were hiring contracted talent constantly. And so let's say a new issue arose with something a contracted talent worked on, you could not go to them and be like, hey, dude, XYZ isn't working here. How can I get this rocking and rolling again? What did you do to make this happen? How can I go in there and fix it? Someone has to step in blind to the situation, learn the code, learn the issue themselves, how it was built. It doubles, triples, it exponentially increases the process of fixing anything. And the most key component of the game is really not even making the content, it's bug stomping, making sure it all works. And to make sure it all works, you need to maintain the same heads who built the dang thing. And when you're hiring people for an 18-month max window, they're in and out. They're in and out, and they cannot come back in and just help you fix something. You just got to hope that the first time it's put in there, it works. And that's kind of a scary thought, right? So a part of this is a product of, yes, bad management. And even a former employee of 343 who now works at Respawn said as much. Patrick Wren writes on Twitter, the layoffs at 343 shouldn't have happened and Halo Infinite should be in a better state. The reason for both of those things is incompetent leadership up top during Halo Infinite development, causing massive stress on those working hard to make Halo the best it can be. And that's just saying what we've all been thinking for a while. But the reality is, unfortunately, that 343 hasn't been performing and the leash has been long. And that was the question all of 2022. How long of a leash can you give them? When Halo 4 comes out, it's questionable for a lot of people. It's very different. Halo 5 comes out, speaks for itself. Very much not the Halo we remember. Halo Infinite rolls around after a long development process. It's finally here, and it just stumbles out the gate. Eventually, you got to downsize. And one thing that Microsoft did state themselves is they targeted underperforming employees. I don't mean to single out anyone individually when I say that, but more so, when you talk about underperforming, you see 343 was hit really hard. I think it kind of says something without saying something, right? And it's just sad to see. So I can't help but speculate on what does this mean for the Halo IP, especially when leadership was targeted, especially when the email wrote, hey, we're focusing on Infinite's multiplayer and live service elements. I don't think any campaign expansions are coming. I don't think they're contracting out certain Affinity anymore to go do the Battle Royale mode. I don't think any of this is unfortunately happening. I think they are absolutely restructuring and looking at how can we redefine ourselves. And I wouldn't be surprised if Xbox is sliding that Halo IP out and finding somewhere else to bring it. We already knew, there were many reports, I've heard as much, that Xbox was displeased with the performance of Halo Infinite. That it definitely tripped out the gate. They've even said as much, so it doesn't even matter what anyone's heard. Xbox has said as much. It had a ton of players, but it died off extremely quickly. And this is the result. And there's a lot of fingers that can be pointed. Bonnie Ross, Xbox for releasing it, just not letting Forza Horizon 5 do its thing throughout the holiday window. It's a lot of blame to be shared. But the unfortunate reality is a lot of awesome people who loved Halo lost their job. And unfortunate for us as consumers is it looks like the priority is no longer the single player component. And that is the sucky part, because I feel like we haven't had a good Halo campaign in a hot minute. What I liked about Halo Infinite is there was a ton of callbacks to Combat Evolved, but what was great about Combat Evolved was you had 343 Guilty Spark, you had Assault on the Control Room, like you had diversity in the environments, and so it really brought the campaign to life. For Halo Infinite, it was like the second level of Halo Combat Evolved on steroids. It was like the Silent Cartographer on steroids, and that wore you down a little bit. So I was still seeking out that truly good Halo campaign, because again, when it ended, it really didn't. There were still so many answers we needed. And now I don't know if we'll ever really get them. With that in mind, could you really look at the laundry list of Xbox IP and not say to yourself, Halo probably needs a reboot at this point? In the age of reboots, I almost think it might be worthwhile, because they've been trying to carry the torch from Bungie for over a decade, and it just hasn't panned out. So that's where everything lies. Bethesda impacted. Xbox as a whole impacted. 343 in particular impacted. And Joe Staten walking out. It all speaks for itself. And of course, we'll keep an eye on how this situation is going to develop. Again, my thoughts go out to those affected, but this is the reality of the situation. And 343 has seen a major shakeup. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, I dish it off to you. What do you think about all of the news I shared in today's video? I'm looking forward to seeing your thoughts. Other than that, follow me on Twitter, follow me on Instagram. Those links are in the description down below. And a big thank you to all the patrons, all the members who continue to support the hell out of the content here. Stay sexy, stay active. I love you all. Peace.